Aloha. First off, I want to thank my friends and family who have supported me during this vow of silence over this year. It's been really intense. I learned a lot. A lot of unexpected things happened on a personal level and on a larger perspective level. Still personal though, but larger perspective. A lot of the things on this channel that I've shared don't really pertain to my current perspective of reality, whatever even that means. Let me just start by first going through some of the things that I've learned during this time and some of the things that have shifted over this time, because honestly, I didn't even really want to make any more YouTube videos. There's no driving force behind providing any kind of information on top of what I already shared on this platform. The channel itself stands alone. None of the videos are monetized. It's all just information that just has come off the top of my perspective, and I've just put it in a entertaining sort of format and shared it with people. And a lot of that style of sharing no longer fits the person that I am after having been silent for an entire year. I don't have the same, everything's different. My interactions with myself, first of all, my inner voice has amplified 100-fold. That's one main thing that comes along with being silent, is that you really only have your inner voice, and we don't really pay attention to that voice until you let go of what we call the outer voice. The outer voice becomes our persona, it becomes the way we interact with people, it becomes ourselves. A lot of the times when the outer perspectives of reality start to take over who and what we are and who and what we stand for. And a lot of that is the reasons why I went silent, is to stand for something rather than just repeating a lot of the information that seems to stand for something. That's one of the big reasons why I really don't want to share a lot more information, is because a lot of the information that's shared, all of the information that has been shared is already known. It's already been colored like a coloring book. People are really just painting or coloring in coloring books that are outlined already, and the next edition is another coloring book that the next group of people or the next demographic of people are going to color in. So the information itself is never really changing. This is one of the realizations that set firmly deeper into my perspective after having been silent. You'll notice a lot of the videos that I re-uploaded and edited over the time of me being silent. You'll notice that a lot of the information that was cut out were a lot of personal perspectives, a lot of explaining myself, on top of the uhs and the dead space that makes it more of a fluid video. The biggest thing that I've seen that changed in those videos was my personal perspectives on what's going on, my personal examples of what's going on. None of that stuff is really needed, because it really goes back to, like, who are you talking to? Like, who, and that goes for anybody who makes YouTube content. Who are you really talking to? Who are you talking with? But more so, who are you talking to, and what are your goals? Like, what do you stand for? When we start to realize who we're talking to, and you start to dissect who you're talking to, you'll see a group of people who need people to talk to them. So you'll see that the people who are creating information or streams of thought to share with people are actually adding to the lack of deeper knowing of the groups of people that they're talking to. So the problem is being inflamed by the people who claim to be against the problem. So really a lot of the content creators, if not all of the content creators, are creating the problems that they claim to be against. For example, people are not going to agree with information on this video, that's a known fact, and they're going to attack certain parts of this video, certain perspectives, and that's based upon the narrowed down version that they see as their reality, and they need to create a bubble to create an idea, an identity, so other people, other groups of people can jump onto that and then do the same thing, make that bubble bigger. YouTube is one big bubble. The thought of needing to change the world is one big bubble. The what is known as like the holy business of, or the righteous business, or the truther business, or whatever group of people. You have Christians who have Christian YouTube channels, and they're saying, you know, basically you're doomed to hell if you don't convert. These are belief systems. These are belief systems that are built up of thought. So these thoughts are based upon different subgroups, subcategories of the overall concept of thought. And this is another thing that stood out when I went silent, is that your inner voice really shines a light on your inner thoughts. And over time, your inner thoughts become more important, because your only real communication that you have on a so-called intellectual perspective is your own inner voice, so your own inner thoughts. And you don't want to be overwhelmed by messy and ridiculous thoughts. So naturally, after being silent for so long, you start to clear out the thoughts that don't matter anymore. So like the videos that I re-uploaded and edited a lot of the information out, you'll see a lot of those thoughts that were there, that were removed, were personal stuff. It's basically a waste of time. You can argue that the entire video is a waste of time, and I wouldn't disagree with that. So we're really talking about, or what I'm really talking about, is what are your goals? What are your intentions with the information that you're sharing? That's a part of the questions that I had to ask myself. In that inner space, you're faced with the overall intentions of, or at least I'm faced with the overall intentions of how I was seeing it, the intentions of what I was speaking against, so-called against, like the system of destructive intelligence that is designed to attack. Like, what is that? Where does that come from? Are my perspectives any different from the perspectives of the people that came before me? Absolutely not. Nothing, like the saying goes, nothing is new under the sun. Okay, well, if that's the case, why don't we stop there and start to analyze what this not newness is that continues to repeat itself, from the destructive intelligence, the creative intelligence, and all of the other intricacies of the details of our perspectives, like what's really going on every level. When I started to ask myself that, everything got real simple. There was no more destructive intelligence, there was no more creative intelligence, and none of the flowery information in the words that are used to sound intelligent or create something that seems new. That's because that's really what's going on here, is people are generating ideas or thoughts that seem new, and on a platform like YouTube, these thoughts and ideas pay off. People get paid. So what's happening is, a lot of the times with most of these channels, especially what I want to focus on with this video, is some of the truther channels that are out there. the truth has to be, a so-called whatever the truth is, has to be watered down and meet a specific demographic of people or thought in order to maintain a source of income. So YouTube overall does this by generating content that is going to, or amplifying content that is going to create more traffic on their website, and censoring content that is going to remove traffic from their website. So on a grander scale, this goes on to individual YouTube channels. When you share enough information with people and they get an understanding and overstanding of whatever it is that you're talking about, there comes a point where you won't have to share any more information anymore, and they won't need you. They won't need, so the teacher helps the student become a teacher now, and the teacher starts to teach themselves, and eventually there'll be no more teaching anymore, because the individuals will let go of this idea of something outside of themselves and then come to a space of, I'm not going to get into that right now, but the whole point is that the content creators are mirroring the YouTube platform in a sense of sharing information that fits a demographic of people that can grow up to a certain point. Once it hits that point, it has to repeat itself and cater to the next group of people who are going to come behind that other group of people, and just kind of filter people through. So as people are siphoning and filtering through, you'll see a lot of these live channels that go on speaking about truth or whatever it is for hours upon hours. Just what are you really saying for hours upon hours? You're really just repeating information that has already been said and is already known, unless there's an intention behind there. And you'll see that there's no intention behind there. The intention that you'll realize is the intention to consume people's time, because you're going to get something back from that time being consumed, either personally if people are not getting paid, or financially from people who are getting paid. So this, I don't want to shrink this down to a monetary sort of thing, but it's a big part of the reason why I'm no longer really having the drive that I used to have before. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. It's very reminiscent of the healthier responses that my perspective has come to after having taken a vow of silence for an entire year. I'm no longer the same person that I was before I stopped speaking for that time. So if I'm no longer the same person that I was after that time, or before that time, what's going to change based upon what I used to do before I took that silence? And what's going to change is pretty much everything. My relationship with time has completely slowed down and sped up in many different ways. One of the main things that I realized is that this entire year flew by because I was no longer holding on to every single fraction of a moment with adding to with my voice, and over time with something beyond my voice, even my presence. I was no longer having to hold on to my surroundings with this reactionary perspective that a lot of people have. You can see their voices. There's an internal voice that responds, and then it turns into the physical voice. That internal voice is constantly running. We don't recognize it because we don't see the separation between the two unless you go silent for a long time. When you no longer have that desire to respond or react to every single moment, you can see how time will speed up. It's not going to slow down. It's going to speed up, which I never even thought about this until it started to happen. Time will speed up because you're basically in see it as like a river. You're in the middle of the flow of the river rather than being on the outskirts of the flow of the river, or even on the banks of the river, just watching it go by. This is what a lot of see, what happens is that you're no longer in the flow of the rhythm of the moment when you accept an identity of a perspective. So a lot of these, for one example, these heavy duty Christian types, or I'll let go of that one and just use flat earthers. What happens is that you accept an identity, you accept this belief system, basically, that becomes your flow now, and you start to create the flow, which is meaning that you're pulling yourself out of that natural flow of just observing what's going on and putting yourself on the bank of that river, watching it go by, walking alongside of it, but no longer really letting go and just being a part of it. That's what I'm seeing and have seen during this silence, is adding to a large majority, if not all, of the problems that are going on. We're not allowing ourselves to be who we are because our belief systems have taken over the inner voice. So you can see the overall inner voice. So for me individually, me no longer speaking for a whole year, I have an individual inner voice, but there's an inner rhythm that is kind of mirrored by the inner voice that you could see that happens with everybody. A man has a rhythm with a woman. We have a rhythm with nature. There are these biological rhythms that once we start to add complexities to it with fancy words and perspectives and things that are catchy and flashy, which is basically what YouTube is. It's just a fancy, ham and cheese sandwich or something like that. Something just, basic and plain or whatever it is. Just overall, you can see the toxicity in that example. But people are seemingly feeding themselves with something. No longer reacting or having the urge to react, and on top of that, no longer having other people expect a reaction is also an addition to the flow of that rhythm or the flow of that time. That's really kind of like the basics of what added up to how I saw this time just really flying by. How that mirrors to my perspective now of the larger scale of what's going on is the mainstream media is another version of adding complexity to you, basically taking you out of the natural flow, your biological flow, and putting you on the banks of that river, completely separating the individual and everybody from their individual flow and whatever flow happens on a grander scale. You can see the flow between a man and a woman that gets interrupted with all of these things that are being put on television now, with all the pedophilia stuff that's being pushed through Netflix and Hollywood and all this other stuff, and the trans LGBT trans stuff getting out there to muddy the waters of everything. Basically, it's not just that one thing, it's the collection of all of the things that really overcomplicate the situation individually and on a larger scale. So as long as you can see, as long as people on an individual scale are complicated, then you can see that happening a lot easier on a grander scale. And this has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. So until the individuals let go of their various banks of consciousness or their banks of belief systems, until that stuff is let go of, there won't be any kind of large scale changes. This is another another thing that I've been seeing that was happening overall, based upon not only the intentions of the mainstream media, but the intentions of large-scale control. And you can see with the COVID-19 stuff that's going on, that being inflamed, the idea of giving your power away to be more controlled because it's safe. And all of this is driven by fear. The fear is the fuel to forcing people to bank themselves, to get out of that, because the fear of not being a part of the grander scale belief system creates an insecurity. This goes all the way back into, again, you can tie in the narcissistic psychology of, or the inclination of narcissistic tendencies that a lot of people play or can be played by. These tendencies are manipulated in every moment, in every belief system of every system throughout the infrastructure of thought. You have the school system, you have the police system, so-called justice system, the government systems. You have your systems of thought of what this place is, the realm. You have the earth, you have the space, you have all of these different belief systems that are manipulated from every single angle, all to keep people in a particular idea of themselves. YouTube is a large-scale version of the complexities of all of those belief systems coming down into one platform and being mirrored by one individual or one belief system or one idea on each channel. So each channel is just a microcosm of the macrocosm that is YouTube. YouTube is a microcosm of a macrocosm that is the mainstream media. And the other systems that are running individually within people are what allow it to go unchecked. So you have the savior programming, you have the holy business programming, you have the identity programming based upon cultural belief systems, the racial belief systems, the ancestral belief systems, all of this old thought that needs to be held onto and reintegrated into the present perspective in order to make the current state of the status quo that will allow people to not feel insecure. It evolves itself over time in order to go unchecked. So this goes down to, you can take that from information to where people were controlled by the idea of the kings and queens being in a relationship with God through the church back in the old days, and that controlling people, believing the kings and the queens because they thought they were of a godly nature and just going off of their belief systems. You can go from that perspective all the way down today to how that was mirrored over time to now government systems, capitalism, so-called democracy. People believe in the TV, now into the internet. People believe in social media and the so-called progressive media. And then you have YouTube and individual YouTube channels. It's the same thing. Shrink that all the way down to the systems of thought itself. Are these thoughts your own? People think they know by saying and believing that they are separate. That separation is at the epicenter of a lot of the problems that are going on a larger scale. So we generate these thoughts that are seemingly different, our own, all these words to, and all these perspectives to feel a certain way about ourselves ultimately. And we really bank ourselves out of that river of the flow, the biological flow, based upon our belief systems. On a larger scale, you can see how this ties into our reality with language itself. And the language is another part of the reason why I went silent. Language overall being a spell that we cast upon ourselves. All of these slaves speaking the slave master's tongue, not only out loud, but internally. So the belief systems that come along with the language. So you can see the belief systems that come along with a dead language, like English, in comparison to a seemingly more alive language that has all these other words that are used to express love and connection and music and all these other things. That's what I mean by a dead language. Well, you can see language and thought overall being already dead. These words that I'm saying right now are already dead. They're not information that hasn't been shared before. This is another reason why I no longer even want to share this information anymore on YouTube, is because I'd rather focus a lot of my attention, or most of my attention, on what's happening in this immediate moment right now. I no longer want to record dead information, dead language, to live on the internet for, spend my living moment, so-called living moment right now, recording dead information, dead language, to speak to who? This goes back to what I was saying, thinking before earlier. Who are we talking to? Who is this? What is this information for? So the information, this is another thing beyond that, the dead and the living. We use this slave and zombie words a lot of the times, but what are the real definitions? How can you really define if you're alive? Can you define your liveliness with thoughts, with belief systems, basically? Same thing with dead, being dead. Like, how does a dead person know that it's dead? Well, a living person, we think something else is going on after that based upon what we think about being alive is. So you have this perspective of living defined by what? People will write down books forever and ever and ever, but that stuff that's written down is dead already. It will never touch that spark that happens before you even think what to say in order to write it down or say it. For me to say, oh, that's what life is another version of creating a dead belief system. So I won't say that. That's no longer my belief system anymore. I used to think, oh yeah, this is consciousness. This is, this is how things are supposed to be. This is what real life is. This is what, the dead people are. These are the zombies. I no longer have that belief system in me anymore. The majority of the belief systems that I used to have are no longer there anymore. Once those belief systems start to fall off, just as I've given you these examples of why they fell off, then you can see more so why there's nothing more to really say, and why I no longer want to be a part of maintaining the dead perspective. Once I let go of sharing those perspectives, people will let go of needing those dead perspectives. And that's really what I want to do. To help people let go of needing this information, to help people let go of needing anything outside of themselves, so they can focus more of the attention on themselves. That's another thing that I realize is of a great value from being so silent over that time, is once people start to refine their relationship with themselves, that will inherently refine the relationship that we have with others, and then carry on to the relationship that we have with nature, and so on and so forth, which was at the essence, the basis of why I went on a vow of silence. These so-called controllers create this identity of humanity. They create this identity of righteousness, and then take it even further, this identity of the holy business, speaking for God and doing this for God, and the whole identity of God. These are belief systems that are complicating something that is inherently divine in its simplicity that we have yet to discover because we've been so caught up in the complexities of the flowery nature of what we think things are based upon what people before us have believed things are. Their beliefs based upon the people before us, what their belief systems were for the way they thought the way things are. You can see how a lot of these identities, these belief systems, we can't let these go. We can't let the identity of God go. We can't let the identity of the past go because it's vulnerable. Getting into the complexities of why is where all of the holy business comes in later on. Destructive intelligence, businesses of destructive intelligence are built on that foundation of why. Whys and hows later on. Why things are the way they are, how things are the way they are or should be. These are where all these destructive systems, and I say destructive in a sense that they're designed specifically to take you away from the simplicities of your reality, which is why people are struggling right now and why people have a desire to speak on that struggle, because people can't eat, people can't drink clean water, and people have no shelter. People don't have that space that is natural to their biological systems. The complexities of the spiritual, so-called spiritual systems, and I've spoken on this in great detail with the New Age community and religions overall. The holy business overall is another. You can see the relationship that church has to the state. See, a lot of the people, if not most of the people who are in the belief system of those religious foundations, have to ignore the relationship that church has to state in order to maintain their personal bubble. They have to ignore that religion is a big part of why people have no food and water right now. People have no shelter. They can't make that connection because it will expose them in certain ways, just the same way as a narcissist would be exposed. Just the same way that narcissists have to maintain a particular belief system with their circle of people who supply them with narcissistic supply. The belief systems of holy business groups like religions and even truther circles or businesses, individuals, it's the same concept. We can't see that because we think we're doing something. Like, people are so full of themselves. It's just a diet narcissist. It's a lighter version of being a narcissist, or at least expressing narcissistic behavior. I don't have any answers for people because there are no answers for people. There's no one thought fix all sort of identity. There's no one belief system. There's no, all of this is just bullshit. There's no, I'm not saying anything new. I don't want to be a part of creating a space, especially over and over and over again, subscription-based videos over time. I don't want to be a part of space creating videos basically that are dead videos, speaking a dead language to maintain a dead consciousness within the individual who thinks they're alive because they have filled their holes, their spaces of reality with a bunch of dead information. This comes from a space of observing the reality of the dead thoughts that we have, that we think are a part of who we are and our liveliness. I didn't see a lot of that until I went silent for that entire year. I'm really relieved to see that there's nothing left to say, because it's up to the individual. It's not for coming from a space of I've already said everything. It's coming from a space of knowing that what needs to be said can only be said by the individuals themselves, their own inner voice. This whole holy business of, like, the world teacher business that's going on with the New Age community and the gurus and the religions, it's at the epicenter of the problems on a grander, on a micro scale and a macro scale. A YouTube channel is just a microcosm of that. I don't want to be a part of that. I'd rather approach people or be in presence with people one-on-one, and that goes into the intention space. Like, what are you really intending? Like, where are your intentions lying? I still feel from this perspective right now that there's work that needs to be done on a grander scale, because there are things that are happening to people that will no longer happen if certain things were said about that information, or if certain things were said about those events that are happening to people. Point being is that you don't have to say it over and over and over again. Once you've made your point, you don't have to say it anymore. How many times do you have to make your own point? This goes back to what I was saying earlier about YouTube channels that go on and on and on and on and on, whether it's with just talking about a particular subject or debating with people, or going against certain people or exposing certain people. All this information is available already. It's out there for people. They can pull this information up on their own. And what I've realized and what I've confirmed is that the information sticks on a deeper level, and it has more of a impact on the individual when they do it themselves. As far as I'm concerned with this platform, I've already said what I would like to say about my perspectives before I even went on this silence. Nothing has changed, really. For me to jump into a space of having something else to say will go against what I really feel about what's being said and the business of saying anything. I don't have that belief system anymore to have to say something. Because, like I said before, who are we talking to? I'm not the person to generate a demographic of people and continually add to that bubble just to maintain. You can go into narcissistic supply, because that's ultimately what's happening right now. This is what the mainstream media is. It's adding to a system of beliefs in order to maintain a system of thought with the individuals on a large scale, so that they can continue to get supply over time from those groups of people. YouTube channels are just a smaller scale version of that. And they utilize different angles to maintain that supply. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. The information that I would like people to know about to help the systems that are going against certain people is already on this channel. I've already shared it over and over in so many different ways. There's nothing more I need to say about it. If there is anything more to be known about it, then it's up to the individual to find that out themselves, and it's up to me to find that out later on. You can see with these spiritual teachers, you can see they have to sell you this identity of awakening, this is happening, the shift is coming, your third eye is opening. You can see these are all things that are sold to people in order to maintain a particular thought. And even more obvious, the idea of that being a particular belief system. People are just selling more flowery or more believable belief systems. I don't want to add to the complexities of self-zombification. Making the most beautiful poetry with a dead language is still dead. There's a sense of cognitive dissonance that happens when we constantly add to the supply chain of belief systems hidden under the veil or the identity of truth and righteousness and this holy business crown that people wear all the time, because it's mirrored against the scale, the larger scale control grid. When people wear that superhero suit, they're actually empowering the system, the zombification system. We don't see that correlation, and you won't see that correlation until you let it go. I spent years upon years investing a lot of my energy, my perspectives. Every day I would wake up in the morning and generate these ideas of what to share. And then for a year, when you wake up and you don't have that going anymore, a lot of things come into perspective. You'll see what you were really adding to and what no longer serves the best usage of whatever's happening in this moment. Yeah, that cognitive dissonance is a heavy part of maintaining that narcissistic supply. We're really just adding to the dopamine response that happens. This is all a pleasure. Going back to what I said earlier about our attachments to God and holy businesses, really you're looking for an extended pleasure. You're looking for something for happiness forever. No different than the New Age looking for a utopia. It's the same thing. This is where there's no separation between truther, so-called self-proclaimed truther communities and the New Age. They're seeking this identity of everlasting truth, same as like everlasting happiness. There's no such thing. It's not meant to be that way. Obviously, the natural flow of our moments to moments is a constant frequency that goes between happiness, what we call happiness, and pain and pleasure and all this other stuff. In order to maintain something for that whole time, you become a robot, a biological robot, which is what is beneficial for the system, which is why channels like YouTube, the mainstream media, are amplified in individuals' lives, because it creates that internal identity it creates this idea of your relationship with yourself. So the information itself is no longer the problem. The relationship that you have to that information is the problem. This is what I'm saying, which is why I no longer want to be a part of that problem. I'd rather focus my attention and allow people to focus their attention on letting go of their relationships to these problems, because it's an expedited way of helping people release their attachments to these problems. A lot of people's attachment to the problems are adding to their self-identity of being a superhero. In that space of being a superhero, you're creating the villains internally and externally, and in a sense, with your seeking of pleasure through the information pleasure or truther pleasure or information pleasure, you're actually adding to the reality and the existence of more pain. Because once you keep adding to the adding fuel to the fire of pleasure, knowing that pleasure, just like happiness, is not designed to last forever, it inflames the fire of the pain. Once we let go of both the pleasure and the pain, then we'll start to see a more natural flow of what our natural flows are built up of, how they are. Stepping back and seeing the abstract. Stepping outside of the internal, the grasps on reality. So my entire channel is based upon that, just like other so-called truther channels is based upon that. We have a grasp on reality. That grasp on reality is causing the problems. We see it as not causing the problems because it's helping people at the same time, so-called helping people. But you're really helping people to a certain point. After that point, it becomes counterproductive. Just as truthful information becomes entertainment after the point is made. Once it becomes entertainment, it becomes counterproductive because now you're consuming the time of the individuals when that time could go towards shifting the systems that are within the truthful info that added up to the reasons why that truthful information exists. So this is where the cognitive dissonance comes from, so-called positive channels or positive perspectives. This is one of the main points I want to make in this video, is to emphasize the cognitive dissonance that is inherent with constantly repeating information that has already been explained, that has already been broken down in so many different ways. Once we start to redefine our relationship with language, communication, connection, these are words that are outside of, they're action words. Actionless words are words like love, like the interpretation. I know that's going to stir a whole bunch of people up, and you'll see what I mean by that. And just the reality that's going to stir a whole lot of people up is the romanticizing that comes along with language. An example of this and how that becomes counterproductive. Kind of loose language like that term, and how much toxicity exists inside of loose language like that. For example, in families, people who, say the overusage of love all the time, how that affects the reality behind the abuse that is going on within those families, and how the term, the fire, the energy of that term, what love is supposed to stand for, no longer exists anymore. It's a hollowed out shell. Another example of that is when people say, make love, not war. And people put signs in their windows for this stuff. It's the same thing like Black Lives Matter. Make love, not war. Well, what's the action of making love? Because there is an action of making war. The action of making war is a very realistic thing that is happening. The action of making love is a romanticizing. It's a fairy tale in whatever the individual believes in that moment. That loose language is adding up to why a lot of the systems that are going on continue to go on. We have to start holding ourselves personally, individually accountable with the language that we use, with the positions that we stand on before anything can really change. What all this is adding up to is timing, basically. A timing of change, movement, whatever you want to call it. From a logistic perspective or a tactful perspective, you can't make any moves unless everybody is, or enough people are ready to make those moves. Right now, most people are consumed with the entertainment of themselves, caught up with the identity of the systems. Truthful information has become entertainment. There's no action behind the perspectives. There's no action, there's no movement behind the truther community. These movements, all the movements that are out there, It's the language that is holding people back from making any kind of idea or whatever you want to call or label of forward progress. It's the language being used. This is why the system utilizes terms like Black Lives Matter. It's a romanticizing. The same thing like make love, not war. Make peace, not war. It's a space up on a pedestal somewhere that people can go to and sit and look down upon everybody else as if they have a grasp on reality, and that's all you need to do. YouTube channels are based upon this. Truther channels are based upon this on a grander scale. I mean, it's no grander than the other one, but it's a more obvious scale, or these New Age channels that are claiming to have the answers for the awakening, the shifting, constantly living in the future, constantly pushing, sharing information that makes you live in the future. Things are going to change the same way. The idea of things are going to change is keeping people away from realizing the change that's happening right now. And it's also creating this pain that comes from things needing to be changed, so things are fucked up right now. That feeling of separation, internal separation, is what's allowing a lot of these hollowed out spaces to just expand themselves inside of individuals under the guise of enlightenment or expanding consciousness or whatever they want to call it, opening their third eye. Forever in the future, you have these spiritual, so-called spiritual teachers, gurus, selling you. You can see people teaming up now, like I said, even before I went on a vow of silence. You're going to have them start to join forces and create this Avengers type of, spiritual Avengers, New Age Avengers type of romanticizing superhero movie. But it's all going to be designed to steal your time and allow the systems to expand underneath that time-stealing moment that continues to be pushed off into the future. As long as those channels of information continue to grow and people keep filling themselves up with this spiritual slash narcissistic supply that's beneficial to the systems overall, which is why Oprah is a big thing and has shifted from manipulating, she's just used as an example, shifted from the television to online, and the television with so-called real world information that's happening on the ground level, shifting that into a different kind of network, but really shifting the thought process into a so-called, from the psychological things that are going on as psychological control grids into the spiritual control grids, by having people like Eckhart Tolle or Deepak Chopra, Tony Robbins, all these so-called progressive and on a spiritual perspective. And you can see the downfalls in the progressive movement being no different. You can see in the New Age community, the New Age is just another version of progressivism. It's the same concept. Look at all the negative effects of progressivism that happens, and why that's out there and being expanded upon by the system. You can just move that over to the observation of how the New Age community is designed to do the same thing and have the same effect on people. Once you have these groups of, the various groups of people or thoughts or belief systems that are existing in the individuals that are mirrored by the YouTube subscription program, I think I shared enough of why I don't want to share anything. I don't want to repeat myself anymore. I've already shared the information that helped me get to a space of being able to let go of a lot of what I was holding on to, that was adding to the weight that I was carrying around, that was released largely for the most part, in my vow of silence. You can look at my channel and see what I'm standing for, the information that I feel is relevant to creating a foundation for moving forward individually and on a larger scale, whatever that means. Doesn't mean a mass exodus or utopian movement towards anything, nothing flowery or romanticized like that. Just as far as stopping the bleeding. That's what I really want to focus on. There are definite bleeds that are happening, and there are vampires out there that are siphoning energy and sucking the blood off of people. And a lot of the things that are of the heaviest bleeds are not being spoken on. They're being distracted by even New Age channels. One of the biggest bleeds that's going on right now are the indigenous people around the world who are being attacked by this colonial control grid that has been bastardized and shrunken down into this cartoon commercial cheap substitute sort of artificial flavoring perspective that is the Black Lives Matter movement. And you have so-called progressive people who are just eating up this so-called movement and filling themselves with this self-righteous identity that is based upon a larger control grid. A control grid that is moving from a national scale to an international scale. Not that it hasn't already been international, only to bring more attention to the reality that the international control grid can get more controlling and can get more intricate. And it can only get more intricate with people being dumbed down and dumbed up. This is why I'm saying people being dumbed down with being distracted by the entertainment, which could also be so-called truth or entertainment, but also dumbed up in the same tone, from the same way, dumbed up into another idea of upness, another idea of being in the know. And then making that identity all that needs to be done. I'll leave it there for now. If I have any more to add on top of this video, which I might, I don't know. I really, like I honestly said, I don't have a fraction of the drive that I had before to produce YouTube content or share any kind of information that is just a repetition of what I've shared before with people. It's just not there anymore. And I don't want to make it seem like it's a bad thing. It's a completely positive thing. It's just that things changed. A lot of things changed for the better. A lot of relief. I might share a little more information on, some of the things that happened during my vow of silence, what I've learned, my experiences, so on and so forth. But maybe not on this channel, maybe on some other channels or something like that. I think I'll feel better speaking with other people on other platforms than I do just sitting here. This doesn't feel natural anymore. Because before it felt natural, but right now, even the way I'm speaking it doesn't feel the same. I might sound the same, it might have the same kind of feeling, but like I said before, I don't want to add to something that I no longer feel is beneficial. The scales have been tipped for the better. They have been tipped for the better. It might not be easy to see how they've been tipped for the better right now, but I assure you from my own experience, it's for the better, and we'll see, right? So